I feel like a lot of men today really need to hear this conversation, as well as women.
I wouldn't be where I am today without going through what I went through. I was the kid who was addicted to drugs. I was the kid who was a people pleaser. We love to focus on the negative things in our life.
Doug Bopst is a former felon turned fitness expert and author who transformed his life from addiction to purpose.
Inspiring millions to embrace discipline, resilience, and personal growth.
It's the unexpected people sometimes who show up that have the most profound change. Before I went to jail, I was convinced that I was going to die by 25.
Do you find that your male friendships have increased and become more deep because you're kind of setting this mirror image of authenticity?
I think when you start to be vulnerable, I think that other people are more likely to do that as well. I mean, we're in this massive loneliness epidemic right now, and I think men are suffering. 80% of suicides are men.
You say in your transformation, like, two very underutilized tools are nutrition and fitness.
Fitness really teaches you is you have to show up for yourself even when life is hard. In life, you're going to be stressed. You're not going to be feeling like 100%, but you still have to show up. One of the things that people struggle with is focusing on their past. Fitness keeps you focused on the future. I think if you sacrifice short-term happiness for hardship and pain, you'll end up with.
Firstly, I want to say thank you to tuning in and listening to the show. It means a huge amount. And connecting with all of you is something that I absolutely love as part of this journey of growing the show. One of my biggest goals of 2025 is doubling the reach of this show. And I can't do that without your support. So I would love to ask you a favor. If you can press subscribe or follow on whichever platform you listen to. This helps us reach more people. And for me, elevating women in science is so fundamental and ethical and scientific information. So if you feel the show empowers you and gives you the information that you've been seeking, I would love to ask a favor in return and to hit that subscribe button and help me reach the goal that I've set for the show of 2025. Thank you. Doug, welcome to Live Well, Be Well. I find it really inspiring to have you sitting here from everything you've gone through within your life to becoming, I want to say, a very inspirational speaker on overcoming adversity, addiction, sobriety, fitness, but also for a woman to say this to a man, for a man to speak so openly and vulnerably about his emotions, his feelings, and his mindset. And I feel like a lot of men today really need to hear this conversation, as well as women. And I wanted to start by, we're going to get into your story, and I really want people to understand, the depths of where you went to, because it is inspiring. But something that came up on those questions was making peace with the past, and how behavior was maybe modeled to you when you were younger, and how that has maybe driven a certain mindset in you today. And you said to me something on those 5 questions that something had really inspired you from Tony Robbins, was that if you were going to blame them for all the bad parts in your life, then you've also got to blame them for the good. So I want to start here about how you look back on your life to how you are now, and how you sit there with kind of so much strength, knowing that so much has happened in the past, and how you're at peace with that today.
I think that quote is so important for a number of reasons, and specifically for somebody who has overcome a life transformation, because what tends to happen, especially when people are transforming their life from something like addiction or something with their mental health or something where they made some really poor decisions that not only impacted themselves but impacted other people, is people have a hard time letting go of the past. And why that Tony Robbins quote speaks to me a lot is because you were asking me, how was I able to make peace with my past? And the overarching theme is that I wouldn't be where I am today without going through what I went through. But not only that, I wouldn't be who I am today as a man, who I am today as a podcast host, as an entrepreneur, as a partner, as a trainer, if I didn't go through what I went through. And, my relationship with my mom, for instance, wasn't the best growing up. I made some really bad decisions as a teenager that impacted our relationship in a negative way. And because I went through a transformation, my life not only got better, my relationship with her is way better than it ever has been because of that. I mean, today I host a podcast, and I consider myself to be pretty confident, charismatic, personable, a great speaker. I was nothing like this as a kid. I was the kid who was just timid. I was the kid who was addicted to drugs. I was the kid who was a people pleaser. I was the kid that was just doing whatever I could to fit in, had no real opinion. I had no real beliefs or values. I was just trying to do whatever I could to fit in and be liked by everybody else. And so because of all the bad stuff in my life growing up, like I was a drug addict and I sold a lot of drugs and I made a lot of poor decisions. I went to jail and I was a convicted felon. But because of all of that and turning my life around, it's made me into the person that you're talking to right now. And so what I invite people to do is, if they're at that place where you've made a transformation, you've bettered yourself, and you're like, I don't know how to let go of the past. I don't know how to let go of these decisions. I think the first thing is to understand that we all make mistakes. I don't know a person in my life that hasn't made any mistake that they, don't regret. Right.
That's common humanity. It's something I speak about a lot within compassion.
And then understanding that, it's okay to make those mistakes, and that all that counts is how you're learning and growing from them. And then the other part, which gets back to the quote, is like, think about like who you are because of that. Like you hear so many people like, I'm so thankful I went, like years later, like I'm so thankful I went through that divorce because I met my like dream partner, or I'm so thankful I got fired from that job because now I'm like in this amazing opportunity professionally that I never had. I'm so thankful that whatever, right? You hear this stuff all the time. It's a hard place to get to because negativity breeds negativity. And we love to focus on the negative things in our life. We love to focus on things we don't have. We like to focus on all these mistakes because our mind is like wired to kind of keep us safe, right? And so that's why that quote is really powerful for me. And it helped me transform who I was as a person, because even after I had a lot of success personally and professionally, I still was like riddled with like guilt and shame around the people that I hurt, around like, what I did for a career, like being a drug dealer and, and being the solution to, people's unhealthy problems. Right. And then also the stuff that went along with that, and the money and stealing, it just was not a good look. But in order to come to peace with that, I had to look at like, all right, like how did that shape who I am today? Here's another thing. I think like, I don't know who said this. It may have been Gary Vee, but it may not have been. But he was talking. Whoever this was talking about. And I don't know. Again, I don't know if it was Gary Vee or not. But they were talking about what how can you reframe things. So for me, like selling drugs, I learned that when I was selling drugs, I learned about customer service. I learned about networking. I learned about like how to make sure that you have the best product on the market. I learned to the importance of like accountability, showing up. So I was able to like reframe some of those skills that I had learned being a drug dealer. I mean, like, oh, like how does this apply to what I'm doing now?
I love that.
Yeah.
You're seeing, I think one of the most like powerful things when you've gone through adversity is actually connecting to common humanity, which you said, like there's not one person on this earth who doesn't wake up every day and go, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or I wish I did that a bit differently. But it also allows, what I'm hearing from you is it's allowed you to reflect on how you want to do things differently next time. And I think the biggest thing that I want to ask is where people might not have already gone through a health transformation, like they might be struggling, whether it's with certain relationships or whether it's with something that's like neurodivergency or accepting themselves or alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, whatever somebody might be struggling with. What was that moment when you went to jail and decided, right, that's enough?
Yeah, so let me paint a picture for the audience of what my life was like when I went into jail. So when I went to jail, I was 21 years old, convicted felon, heavily addicted to Oxycontin, cocaine, weed. I had 21 jobs by the time I was 21, which is not good. Crippling anxiety, depression, mental health issues, just like I was the guy you would never want your daughter to date. That's the way I would describe myself. And I'm also the guy you would never want your son to hang out with because of the way I behaved. And so I got to jail and I'm like 50, 60 pounds heavier than I am now. And the first, and the day I went to jail, I cried because I didn't want to go into jail. And the day I left, I cried because I didn't want to leave. And it's because the first few weeks of my incarceration, the thing I had to do was detox cold turkey from Oxycontin, which was like having the worst case of the flu for like 2 or 3 weeks. It was awful.
And that's an opioid, which is
Yeah, it's an
hyper
opioid.
addictive.
Yeah, and I was snorting, hundreds of milligrams up my nose every single day. And my soon-to-be cellmate, Eric, was sitting at the table playing Scrabble. And I describe him, just again, for context, he looked like a more jacked version of Brad Pitt from Fight Club. He's like, you're going to start work. He like looked at me and he could tell that I was just super like off because I was so like out of it from the withdrawal from drugs. Just timid, kind of like didn't know where I was. And he's like, when you get through your detox, you're going to start working out with me. And I looked at him and I'm like, dude, are you serious? Like I could be a model for Pillsbury right now. Like there's no way I'm going to work out, especially in front of a bunch of grown men. Like get out of here. And soon after that, I see this guy work out and he was doing all kinds of push-ups, pull-ups, running, ab work. And he was kind of the guy that I wanted to be, physically at least. I wanted to be, this guy was super ripped. Had big arms. And I was like, man, like that's what I want to look like. I think that will make me happy, which is another story that we'll get into later. But I see him work out and then we're in the cell talking. And this is the moment that changed my life. He looks at me and can I cuss on here?
Yeah.
Okay. So he looks at me and like any good potential coach does, he starts asking me questions. And he's like, Doug, why are you in jail? And I started telling him about the charges. I started telling him about my life. And then I started to blame everybody else for my problems but myself. And he looked at me and he said, quit being a bitch. And I was like shook because I was like, I thought this guy was going to like coddle me. Like, it's okay, Doug. Like the world's against you. It's everybody else's fault. And I'm like, what? And he's like, dude, like you're blaming everybody else for your problems but yourself. He's like, there's plenty of people that grew up in your circumstances that didn't go to jail, right, Doug? And I'm like, yep. And he's like, so this is on you. He's like, no one's coming to save you. He said, you have 2 choices when you're in here. Be a man, look yourself in the mirror and say, you got yourself here and it's up to you to change, or go be a little bitch and go cry in the corner and say, woe is me. And he's like, most people will end up doing that. And it was at this time, Sarah, where the drugs had started to come out of my system. I was thinking, as clear as I could at the time. And I was like, maybe this guy is right. Like, clearly I don't know what I'm doing. I was so egotistical to think that I still knew how to operate in life, given my track record at the time, that I was like, hey, maybe like I'll try something different and I'll give exercise a try. And that conversation in that cell with Eric is the conversation that changed my life. And it's the conversation that stays in my head when times get tough. It's the conversation that stays in my head when I don't want to do something that I know I need to do. It's the conversation that stays in my head when unfortunate things happen to me. Because it's super easy. And to be honest, it's like a nice sob story for people to hear. And the problem is that becomes an addiction as well, is like being trapped in that victim mindset. Because you can tell most people about my childhood and they're like, oh my God, you had it so hard. I'm so sorry. But what happens is people will blame what happened to them 30 years ago for their behaviors they're making today, which I think is total BS. And I think that keeps people trapped.
Do you still speak to Eric?
I spoke to Eric. So it's funny how things come full circle on podcasts like this. So when I cried the day I left jail because he had helped me change my life. I went from not being able to do a push-up for my knees to doing a set of 10 push-ups, being able to run a mile, lost some weight. He really instilled these mindset, like I guess hacks, if you will, into my mind, but also just so many, so much life wisdom. He gave me a workout plan that I still have framed here, so I never forget where I came from. Got out. We had exchanged a few letters. He ended up getting out. we met up and we like worked out together, which was cool because I was doing like these like super novice workouts that he was giving me when I was in jail, and he's doing like, you know, a million push-ups. I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. And so it was cool to be able to actually like work out like together, like what he was doing, I was doing. And then we stayed in touch, and then he kind of like went a different path, unfortunately. And then he ended up passing away, which was one of the saddest days of my life, because I often wondered like why did he choose me to help save my life when he couldn't really save his own? And the coolest thing about all of this is, I think when he passed, I think his family was going through his Facebook, and they were just searching for his friends, and and he had talked about me to his family because he was really proud that I had changed my life, and he even was like now you inspire me, like he was saying that to me, which was really cool. And they saw that I was like doing podcast interviews. And so they listened to these podcast interviews where I shared the story like I'm sharing right now. And they're like, you know what? Like I got like a message, I think from his cousin or something, that was like, hey, I'm like really thankful that you do this because it sheds light on the Eric that we knew. And I never understood, like obviously I get on shows like this and I have just to help people and to share my story. And hopefully, if one person listens to this or watches this and they're like, oh, you inspire me, like my day is made. But I never knew that it would have like these downstream effects with his family. And got invited to come speak at his funeral and was the last person to speak and was able to like share this story with his friends and family. And it meant a lot to me. And it's just it's crazy how life works out sometimes. Like it's the unexpected, and it's the unexpected people sometimes who show up that have the most profound change. I've learned so much from people who have nothing. And I think it's because they have just learned to not take the simple things in life for granted.
I've spent years in the fashion industry, but also years as a scientist, trying to understand how our bodies are meant to move. And I'll be honest with you, most shoes are terrible for our feet. I know this firsthand. For years, I wore the wrong shoes, ones that looked great, but in reality gave me persistent back pain and messed up toenails. I searched everywhere for a pair of shoes that wouldn't just support my feet, but would also help them heal. And I struggled because most healthy shoes don't exactly scream style. And then I found Vivo Barefoot, something that finally looks good and actually works. I wear mine with cargo pants, awesome leather trousers, a crisp white tee, and my favorite sunnies. Not only do they feel great, but they really fit my style. Wide, thin, and flexible, these shoes allow my feet to move naturally the way they're supposed to. And the best part, just 6 months of barefoot shoes can increase your foot strength by 60%, helping to undo the years of damage from conventional footwear. Now, if you've ever had the same problem and tried to find a shoe that supports your body without sacrificing style, then this is it. Try Vivo Barefoot for yourself and feel the difference. You can get 20% off if you use the code LWBW20 at vivobarefoot.com, where the T's and C's apply. Trust me, your feet, your back, and your outfit will thank you.
I wanted to find something, but maybe I'm going to have to come back to it, about somebody sent me a quote the other day. I felt very emotional when you were talking about that, because sometimes somebody might not even have a conversation with you. It's just their energy that they pass on to you that can have one of the most profound impacts on your life. It's interesting how people come into your life for teachers, and it's amazing that the transformation that he passed on to you, and you basically passed that on to him, even in your goodbye, which is really powerful.
It is, and it was very unexpected. Like when I got that message, like I was in shock when his mom had reached out and told me he passed. And then when I got that message from his cousin, I was like, wow, like this is crazy. And it was tough. I mean, it was one of the toughest days I'd experienced since getting out of jail, because he was like the guy who was like this unexpected blessing who showed up in my life. And without him, I would be dead. Like, there's no doubt about it. Like before I went to jail, like I was convinced that I was going to die by 25. Like my friends and I all joked, like if we can't sustain the lifestyle we're doing now. Like, what's the point of like living anymore? And when I went to jail, I didn't want to change my life. I wasn't like, yeah, I'm going to go to jail. I'm going to clean my life up day one. Like, I was like rotting away in a cell, like just waiting for the time to pass until he had that conversation with me that got me into fitness, which inevitably, has not only saved my life, but allowed me to do what I'm doing now.
Oh, this is it. I found it as you said it. We sometimes encounter people, even perfect strangers, who begin to interest us at first sight, somehow, suddenly, all at once, before a word has been spoken.
Yeah. That's crazy. It's true.
I really just kind of had that come up in my mind when you're speaking. And what I find, I felt your emotion when you were saying how hard it was to speak at his funeral. Something that I find really inspirational about you, Doug, and there's a lot, is that you're very vulnerable in how you speak with your emotions. I have like two kind of questions for you on this, because being a personal brand, what was the moment when you decided to speak openly about all of your insecurities and your journey, like publicly? Because there's one thing saying it out loud to yourself, and then there's another thing saying it out loud to your partner who you trust, or a best friend, or your mum. Then there's a third thing of sharing that publicly. Like what was your movement into that?
Well, initially I had the good fortune of being a personal trainer where I have intimate conversations. I had intimate conversations with people on a regular basis about their life, about my life. And so when people would ask me how I became a trainer, there was opportunities for me to share bits and pieces of my story with jail. Now, I was very private with it for a little while because, at the time I was on probation. The gym I had worked at, they had given me this incredible chance to work there, given my background. And I was like, I just was nervous. I was like, are these people still going to pay me if they know that I was a convicted felon? And I remember like telling one of my clients at the time that we had become really good friends. And I was out with her and her wife for dinner one night. And I remember telling her, I'm like, I'm afraid to like give the whole story. And this was like very early in my career. And she's like, well, Doug, like if people are still judging you for what you did like years ago, like they're not meant to be in your life. And that hit me hard, because I was like, you know what? Like the people who are meant to be in my life, the people who are meant to like do business with me, as long as I'm not still doing those things and I'm working on bettering myself and I'm on the path, like it's not going to bother them. They're going to be even more inspired. And so that like inspired me to start sharing more publicly. Local media like heard about my story, and I did a lot of press early in my personal training career, which got me good at being on camera. And then, through that, that's all I know is like that I share my story, I share lessons, and with hopes of it helping others. And I also have this like, do I struggle with confidence sometimes? Of course, I think everybody does, but I consider myself to be an incredibly confident person. And I have no issue talking about my flaws and being vulnerable with them. I have no issue talking about the mistakes I've made in my life. And I'm 100% convinced that, as long as I'm being honest and as long as I'm doing the right thing, the people that are like hating on me, I'm just like, like that's on them.
The authenticity that shines through, do you find that your male friendships have increased and become more deep because you're kind of setting this mirror image of authenticity and not kind of hiding the parts of you that you feel maybe ashamed by, that you're actually kind of giving yourself out and saying, I'm really proud of what I went through and who I am?
I think people are attracted to confidence, and I think people are attracted to people that have their stuff together, right? And so I think when people share stuff, I think it has to come from a place of personal growth and what you've learned versus just like dumping on people all the time, because that's not attractive. That said, yeah, there's probably, I don't know. There's dozens of male friends that I have that I'm super close with, that if I went to zero and lost everything, I know I would have a place to stay. I think it's Brene Brown that's like, I think vulnerability is like the bridge to connection. It's something like that. I could be butchering that. But I think when you start to be vulnerable and you share like stuff that's going on, I think that other people are more likely to do that as well. The problem, I think, is that there's been this narrative for men to be more vulnerable and open up about their emotions, right? Which I think is great. I think men need to be, I think the true sign of being like an adult is being able to, most of the time, control your emotions, right? We all have bad days. And so I don't think it means that men just, you know, complain all the time or bitch or, you know, or yell. I think it's more like, can you have a fundamental understanding of what's going on in your life, whether it's right or wrong? Can you digest that in a way that feels right to you? And can you communicate it in a way that creates conversation, right? And I think when you do that, you find people are going to be more attracted to you, whether it's, you know, in a professional way or in a personal way. And I've been very fortunate that I've had a lot of the same guy friends for years and years, and that, you know, we talk, and if I need anything, like, they're there for me. And it's just something that I think is so important now. I mean, we're in this massive loneliness epidemic right now that exists for a variety of reasons, and I think men are suffering. I think 80%,
suicide is so high for
80,
men, and that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, like 80% of suicides are men.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's very easy as a woman. It's not easy as a woman, but women speak to other women very openly, I think, within amongst their friends. And I found with men, it's much less so. So I think having somebody like you who is very, you know, who can mirror vulnerability, but also a powerful mindset and reframing the mindset can be very inspiring.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I really appreciate that. One of the tips I'll share is that you have to like maintain this rookie mindset, and not a rookie mindset in where you're settling or where you think you don't have things figured out. It's more like maintaining this mindset to always want to learn and grow, and to understand that you're not the smartest person in the room. Like, you know, some of my like closest friends in the podcast space have shows that are way bigger than mine, way more successful. And it'd be easy to be like, oh, like, I don't know if I want to, like, I'm kind of afraid because they're better than me. But I'm like, wow, that's inspiring to me. And like, you know, I really admire what they've built. What can I learn from them? How can I also provide value to them in their life? And what I've also learned, and this maybe isn't as relatable to the audience because not everybody's in this space, but just because somebody's more successful than you doesn't mean that they wouldn't want to be your friend. It's like, all right, are you a good person? Are you like working on yourself? Are you growing?
But what I find interesting about that is that you say successful, but I also think that there's so many different dimensions and elements of success. So is it, you know, some people might have a very successful home life, you know, a great family, or feel very rich in that. Others might have that with work and feel very rich, but then feel less successful in another part of their life. It's interesting how we kind of define that category of success, because I think a richness of diversity of your friends can show you different elements that you can learn on different parts of your life. Right.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like success isn't just financial, right? Success isn't just like numbers. It's, you know, when I was in my 20s, you know, I had a lot of success financially. I had a lot of success professionally in my career. And I remember, like, you know, looking at one of my like really good friends, and he was like happily married with a couple kids. And I was like, man, and sometimes I was like, man, I wish I had what you had. Like, I wish I was like kind of settled down. My face wasn't, you know, on the internet or whatever. And I wish I could just be like a normal, like, dad, you know? And so it's funny because and I saw that as being successful in a different way than when I was being successful. And you're totally right. And I think that, you know, one of the other things I've also learned is that, like, in person, and it's funny that we're saying this because I know that, like, I'm the only virtual interview we're doing, but in-person connection is so undervalued right now. And we live in this world where there's a lot of superficial relationships, a lot of superficial connections that happen via social media, which I believe social media is a great tool if it's used effectively, but it's created this trap that people can fall into to not have to have real conversations. And I remember, like, you know, Simon Sinek, I saw one of him, he was on, I think it was a Inside Quest, it was called at the time before it was Impact Theory. He said something This video went viral, and it was about like kids and technology, and he said something like, there's no app for like in-person, how to make in-person connections. It was something like that. And if Simon, if you're there and listening to this or watching this, I'm sorry, but it was so true, because it's like, there's apps that can bring you food to your house. There's apps that can tell you where to go. There's apps that can tell you how much money you have. There's apps that can tell you, where potential romantic matches are that are near you. But there's no app to teach you skill and how to have an actual conversation with somebody. And that's what I think happens when you're in person with somebody.
I think, friendships is what we spoke to about Simon Sinek on this podcast. And it's something that's really essential, I think, especially in moments of transformation. But I know that something else that was really important, and I mean, this show is so much about health, nutrition, emotion, mindset. I mean, it's all the pillars of living well, being well. And you say in your transformation, like, two very underutilized tools are nutrition and fitness. And I want to like deep dive into that a little bit more, because I think I wasn't an addict, but I had a very disruptive relationship when I was younger, being in the fashion industry, with, food and fitness and what my self-worth was, and comparison, and all of those things that come with being photographed from every single angle and know what every single part of your body looks like. I would love to know like how that played such a fundamental role in addiction for you, and how you made the most of that, and how you now feel about nutrition, diet, fitness, all of those things.
So I think fitness is the gateway for personal transformation. And I think it is the most underutilized tool for recovery from addiction. And the reason I say that is because take the physical benefits out, like take out all the benefits as far as longevity, strength, take all that away, because we all know that the effects. But the main things that I got out of it was it helped me become comfortable being uncomfortable. I was so afraid of collapsing on the ground when I did my first push-up when I was inside jail. I was so mortified. I was insanely scared. And when I did that, and I did collapse, by the way, what I noticed was everybody around me just kind of looked and were like, oh, just keep going. Nobody laughed. Nobody made fun of me, because they got it. They were like, oh, he's trying to better himself. And then once I was able to do that one single push-up, it felt like I just climbed Mount Everest. Like, that's how much self-confidence it built. So it helps you get comfortable being uncomfortable. It allows you to focus on small wins, right? Like fitness, to be fit, to be jacked, to be lean, whatever your goals are, doesn't take a day. It's a compounding effect of effort on a daily basis, right?
Let me tell you about OneSkin and why I'm genuinely fascinated by what they're doing. Founded by all-women team scientists, OneSkin is a skincare brand that's redefining how we age. And you can get 15% off your first order using code LWBW. What's caught my attention is their groundbreaking approach to skin health at a cellular level. Instead of masking the signs of aging, OneSkin tackles the problem at its root with its OS01 peptide. Here's how it works. As we age, our skin accumulates senescent cells, or zombie cells, that speed up aging in healthy cells, causing wrinkles and loss of elasticity. OneSkin's OS01 peptide is scientifically proven to target these cells, reversing your skin's biological age for healthier, more resilient skin. This isn't about chasing eternal youth. It's about maintaining a strong, healthy skin at any age. And since your skin is the body's largest organ, keeping it healthy is key to your overall well-being. So if you want to see what the science of longevity can do for your skin, visit oneskin.co/LWBW and use code LWBW for 15% off your first order. Do you know what scared me being in LA, Doug, to not interrupt you? Is yesterday I was walking to a yoga class and I saw this poster that said 4 bullet points. It said GLP-1, medications, nutrition, meal plan. And that, you're talking about growth and there's not one quick fix. and what you've gone through and where you've got to, but you see now what's being advertised as if you take these things, you can get that body instantly.
Yeah, and I think for some people that can be helpful if you're like severely obese or have like, type 2 diabetes or something. But I think for the general person, I think you have to really look at your lifestyle first. And, that they're going the small wins thing, it's like when I was able to do that one push up for my knees, that gave me the confidence that I could do 2 and then 3. And then that helped me build, this ability to do that set of 10 push-ups I referenced earlier when I was in jail. And that's like what recovery is. They say one day at a time for a reason. It's these compounding days and steps to become the best version of yourself. The other thing that fitness really teaches you, which it's just like a life skill, is you have to show up for yourself even when life is hard. Like sometimes in life you have to play hurt. And I don't mean like if you tear your ACL, you go and like do the leg press. I mean that in life, you're going to be stressed. You're not going to be feeling like 100%. You're not going to sleep well, but you still have to like show up. And at the gym, when you really get into it, like you show up. The other thing that I believe fitness really teaches you is it teaches you how to leverage pain. And what I mean by that is this, couple things. Number one is when I went to jail and I was having trouble doing these push-ups, a couple of the guys were like, think about what makes you angry every time you can't like do a set. And I didn't know how to like tap into that and connect the dark side of pain until like maybe about a month or 2 into my sentence. I learned how to do that. And when you do, you become powerful because you're able to think about like the things that bothered you in your life and channel that negative emotion into something positive. And what also happens is, fitness, in order to get stronger, you have to literally like tear down your muscle fibers to rebuild and then rebuild them for muscles to grow, right? You have to like train till near failure on an exercise in order for your muscles to grow. You have to literally like, if you want to get faster at the mile, you have to literally like run like faster than you ever have and like stop because you're like, so out of breath or your heart rate's too high, and then to recover. And that's life, right? In life, you go through painful moments. You do things that are challenging. And it's not to say that you have to physically go out and do something hard every day on purpose. I mean, like life's going to come at you no matter what. And you can either stand there and let it beat the crap out of you, or you can figure out ways to resist and navigate through that. And I just think fitness is a great mechanism for that. Last thing I'll say about it, because I could just go on and on about this, I just love this topic, is one of the things that people struggle with is focusing on their past, right? We've talked about this. Fitness keeps you focused on the future. You're setting and achieving goals for the person that you want to become. The other thing it allows you to do within that frame is a lot of people, specifically addicts, specifically people that are looking to step into this new version of themselves, they have a hard time changing friends because they're like, oh, like I went to high school with that person or I went to college with that person, but those people are still out doing drugs. They're still partying every night. They're still negative. They're still like acting, childish, right? And you don't want to be that person anymore, but yet they're still kind of like this gray area because they've been your friend for like 10 years or whatever. And so people have a hard time being like, all right, where do I now meet new people to replace those friends? And the framework around that is going to the gym is like the best place to meet new people, because typically when people are there, they're more forward thinking, they're more positive, they're focused on bettering themselves, they like care about themselves, right? And those are the types of people, generally speaking, that people in recovery are trying to find so that they don't fall back into their old patterns as well. And then so from that, I mean, that's to me, it just sums up why I believe if you're wanting to better yourself, work out. You don't have to be a bodybuilder. You don't have to be a professional sprinter. You don't have to like compete, but move your body. I promise you'll feel better.
I mean, I never regret saying, oh, I shouldn't have gone for that run, which I always find really interesting when I'm like trying to motivate myself to go for a run. Someone spoke to me the other day and they told me a study, so take this with a pinch of salt, because it's very much a association, not a causation, is that people who floss their teeth end up having around 8 years extra on their life. And it's interesting. It's not the flossing the teeth that has given them those 8 years extra. It's not like going home now every night and flossing your teeth and thinking that's what's going to extend my life. It's the consistency and it's the detail to caring about looking after themselves. So they're not just flossing their teeth. They're doing lots of other habits because they're taking accountability for their health overall. So they're going to be probably working out a lot more, probably not smoking, probably getting good sleep. It's all of these kind of other areas of habits that are ingrained that has kind of given that association.
Yeah, I mean, it's like habits compound, right? Either in bad or in good. And I think, that's one of the overlooked things. So I think that people have to understand that your habits compound, whether they're good or bad. And if you're not self-aware, it will cost you long term.
Of course. I mean, Atomic Habits by James Clear writes about that eloquently. I think, you spoke to me about things that we speak about on this show. And you mentioned that one of your kind of biggest hitting YouTube videos was around the 5 things that you learn from quitting weed.
Yeah.
One, like, how did it make you feel, kind of, I guess, like looking back on that process, and what were those like 5 top line things that you have learned from quitting weed? Which, being in America and recording this show here in LA, it's very different because it's illegal to buy weed in the UK, right? But here it's very different. Like, you can go and buy some from a shop counter. So it's a different mentality, even being here, having that option to be able to go and buy it quite readily. Whereas in the UK, there's still so much friction to get it. People can get it very easily, but there's still more of a friction. So I'd love to kind of hear the mindset around that.
Yeah. So like part of my personal training business over the years is I have mentored and coached like a lot of young men that have struggled with addiction and stuff. And fitness is like you help them use fitness as their catalyst to transform their lives. And I have relationships with therapists and medical professionals that if they need that kind of support, they're able to get that. But a common theme that I saw was like these kids were like heavily addicted to weed, and not just like in a mental way, but they were like in like rehab or going to like mental hospitals for marijuana, which to me, like growing up, it was like unheard of. It was so, you kind of got made fun of if you went to rehab for weed when I was younger, just because like it wasn't nearly as potent as it is today. And so I was on this quest. I'm a very like curious person. I'm like, what's going on? And so I started to do some research. And online, you would think that based on some of the information you see online, that weed is like totally safe and healthy for people and that it cures anxiety, it does all these things. But then I was finding zero like data to back that up at all. Like I was perusing through like the scientific literature and I was looking for different references and I couldn't find anything. And so I wanted to do the best possible job I could. And I was like, I'm going to do a cannabis series on THC and weed. And my goal was how it impacts like the mental health of kids, because that's, I genuinely was like, I already kind of knew that it was bad for kids, but I also wanted to shed light on the truth about the dangers of it. And so I interviewed Dr. Anna Lemke, I interviewed Dr. Wilson Compton, who's the deputy director of NIDA, interviewed Dr. John Crystal, who's the chair of psychiatry at Yale, interviewed one of the top researchers in the UK on cannabis. And I found hardly any benefit to it. I mean, there were some that may have said like, oh, it could. I mean, there was some, I think, research at some point that I saw that said something about pain management potential or something. But there was, as far as like mental health, it was like, I heard there was no real benefit. When I say weed, I'm talking about THC. I'm not talking about CBD. And what I learned is what's happened is the THC content in today's weed has risen a lot, and the level of CBD, which I believe offsets the negative effects of the THC, hasn't risen in proportion to the THC. So now the weed that people are getting is way more potent with THC, and it's making people have more psychotic episodes. It's causing different psychiatric issues. And so when I did the video about quitting weed, I was kind of nervous. I was nervous because I was like, all right, this is like, I think I was kind of ahead of the curve a little bit. Like I hadn't really seen a lot of content on it. And I just knew that people like love weed. So I knew I was going to get just crushed in the comments. And I didn't expect it to be that I was like, all right, like I'll record it just to share my own experience. I didn't expect it to have like well over whatever it is, 300,000 views right now. And I don't remember exactly the specific gifts at the time, because it's been, over, almost a year and a half, I think, since I recorded it. But what I will share is that my mental health got a lot better. And I think I talked about that in the video, where I had a lot of anxiety. I struggled with panic attacks as a kid. And the panic attacks were like induced when I would get high off marijuana. Like, I was in the emergency room twice thinking that I was having a heart attack when I was a teenager because I was so high. And when I stopped smoking weed, like, those severe panic attacks like went away. My anxiety got much better, because what happens is, and I don't know exactly from a chemical perspective what happens to the brain, but what I think the way I understand it is, it may reduce anxiety in the short term, but long term, it does something to your brain that makes it harder to deal with life. Like, that's one of the biggest concerns, I believe, with young people smoking weed, is that it does something to the wiring of your brain where it teaches your brain that stress is bad and that you need a substance to like fix it. And it just like kind of changes the context of how your brain responds to stress. So my mental health got significantly better. The second thing is, I was able to think way clearer. I mean, the stereotype of like, oh, you kills brain cells and you lose memory, like, that definitely happened with me. I can't speak for everyone, but anecdotally, like, my memory wasn't good. My thinking wasn't very clear, obviously, based on my choices. And when I stopped, my brain did heal, and I did, begin to get my memory back and that sort of thing. The third thing is, I stayed out of legal trouble. Like, when I was smoking a bunch of weed and selling drugs, it was obviously illegal, and got me into some trouble. The other thing is, and we can, this may be a bridge to talk about external validation, is it allowed me to have a healthier relationship with external validation, at least in the short term, because I had this addiction to like being liked when I was a kid. And when my phone is blowing up from people like wanting to get high with me or wanting to buy drugs from me, I mean, that like was heavily addicting for me. So I had to like really, I ended up, I had to really like unlearn, some of those unhealthy patterns.
Well, I think that's a big one, especially for, maybe men don't talk about that as much as women, but I'd love to know, like, I think you said in our Substack conversation for the compassionate cure, that not only has your external validation shifted, I guess, from not smoking weed, but even from then you kind of transitioned, I guess, maybe into a different addiction with exercise, a more healthier addiction. But that was also driving external validation. And that's something you've also switched.
Yeah. I mean, as a kid, and I can't speak for every guy, but I think a lot of guys when they're younger, I think their level of success is, at least internally, the way they think can be dictated by how athletic they are, what their luck is with like pretty girls, how successful they are, what their friend circle is like. And so as a kid, I didn't really have that in the way that I wanted it, right? And so I was like, oh, if I pursue this thing, if I get to, a certain level of body fat where I can have an 8-pack, and if I can have big arms, and if I can be successful, and if I can, have, chase pretty women and date them and then be attracted to each other, whatever, like, that'll be happiness forever.
Yeah.
And I got to that place in my 20s. Like, I was incredibly lean. I got attention from a lot of pretty girls. I was a very successful personal trainer. And then then you have this awakening that I wasn't really happy. And as a matter of fact, I was more miserable because I felt like I had been like sold this bill of goods, in that, I thought all this stuff would lead to me being, super happy. And then it didn't. Like, I was still the same old Doug. Like, I still had to deal with the inner me that I hadn't dealt with. And I was also doing it for all the wrong reasons. Like, I wasn't even doing it for me. I was trying to achieve a certain physique to get admiration from other people. I wasn't doing it necessarily to prove anything to myself. Now, I mean, early on, like, it kept me in recovery, and it's been a staple of mine to keep me in recovery this long. But eventually, once I started to see success and results, I was like, oh, like, I'm getting attention from people for looking a certain way. Let me just fuel this more.
Well, it gives you validation, right? It gives you validation that people like you, which if that's hyper important and you haven't felt that before, then you're going to add gasoline to that fire. You're going to want to grow it.
And I don't want to I don't want people to think that I'm saying that it's not okay to be liked by other people or to be validated, because I think that that's very healthy. And I think it's a matter of fact, like, you need it. But if you're so empty and broken inside, or if you have this view that you can't feel good about yourself unless other people feel good about you, like, it's just you're gonna lose, right? And for me, I had this literal like come to Jesus moment where I was training a guy who was a pastor at a local church. And again, this conversation isn't about religion. It's just more about like what really kickstarted another level of transformation for me. That had like really been bothering me to come to church. And I was just like, dude, like, I'm not coming to church. Like, I'm going to hell for putting you through this workout. Like, I was taught, if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. And I was like, I'm on the highway I was already like, down the escalator for all the choices that I made. And so fast forward to like this point where I'm at this business retreat in Florida, and I break down, and I'm like so miserable. I just realized that all of the choices that I had made up until that point, were just not helping me truly be happy with myself. And I remember going home and calling this, and one of my mentors at the time was like, Doug, you need some flavor of spirituality in your life. I don't care what it is, but he's like, you have so many things going for you. You're a good looking dude. You have a solid group of friends. You have a great story. You have a purpose. You have all these things going for you, but there's nothing like else about it. There's no like underlying theme. There's nothing that makes it about anything other than yourself. And so I called this guy, Ben Abel's his name, that I trained. And I just said, hey, Ben, like, I think I'm ready to give this Jesus thing a try. And when I told him that, his reaction was that he had just won the lottery. I was like, why is this guy so happy? It's so strange. It was so strange. And I go into his office. I pray that, I accept that Jesus died for my sins. And I started to cry. And I cried because I felt this weight come off my shoulders that I felt like I had been carrying for so long, where I could finally begin to be at peace with certain moments in my past, specifically with my mom. Like, I walked out of his office, I called my mom, and for the first time, like, I apologized to her. Like, I actually like authentically apologized for the way that I behaved. I began to realize that, Jesus, died for my poor decisions, and that now, like, that's been done and I can move on. And that if I was expecting other people to forgive me, I have to forgive other people. And there's a verse that's really been meaningful to me. It's like in the book of Genesis, that it says, it's Genesis 50:20. It says something like that I went through the pain. Like, I went through the pain I went through to help myself and help other people. And when I say this, I'm not pushing my beliefs. I don't go to church hardly at all. I'm a Christian, but I don't believe like that's the only way that you have a relationship with God. That's just what really worked for me to make a lot of peace with my past. And I know, like, talking about religion and spirituality, it's funny, Dr. B and I were just talking about this the other day. It can kind of get weird because people are like, I don't want to touch it. But I like to talk about it in a way that where it helped me, and I don't, look at anybody else any differently if they believe something different than me. But that was what really got me going into being like, all right, like, you're kept alive for a reason. Like, I couldn't make up the fact that I was in jail and this guy helped me use fitness to change my life. And now I'm helping you, and now I'm helping other people do the same. Like, I couldn't have really done that on my own. Like, I felt like somebody else was like carrying me through that process. And it's been really transformational.
I think there's an amazing beauty in that, which is hope. And I think when we lose hope, we lose faith in ourselves. And I think, whatever anyone believes, I think having something where you can feel unjudged in a space to let go and feel that you can have support, whatever that context is one of the most important things, to not feel that you're just carrying everything on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about you don't have to be religious to have faith. Like, I believe that faith is believing in the unseen. It's standing in that darkness and knowing that if you can just put one foot in front of the other, it is small. It can be super small steps, but if you just keep going and knowing that the light will come no matter, and you don't know when it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, how, but you just are so confident that when you continue to walk forward, the light will come. And that to me is like faith. I mean, and obviously the opposite of that to me is fear, where people get kind of stuck and they stand in that, in the depths of darkness, or they go back to those old relationships, old friends, old habits, because they're just unsure of when that breakthrough will happen. And that, goes back to, my conversation with my cellmate and why, that fundamentally it was the most important conversation in my life. It's because it allowed me to believe that no matter what, as long as I took responsibility and was in control of taking certain steps to trying to get a certain result, like good things would eventually happen. And when you have faith, it keeps you in the game, right? Like when you don't have faith, you're out and you just have to keep going.
Can I ask, like, through everything that you've been through, because I think there's this real importance to know as we kind of come full circle on this topic and this conversation, is you've obviously been through an incredible amount of self-growth and personal development and moments that have completely changed the trajectory of your life. If you were 5 and you looked where you are now, I pretty much can guarantee you probably wouldn't write the story that you've had.
Right.
How do you, getting up every day, what I think is really important for people to understand is I'm sure that you don't get up every day and spring out of bed and go, this is the best day, I'm super happy, everything's at ease. What are I don't want to say tricks, because I don't like these hacks and tricks that we say that make it all sound really easy. But what do you do to keep that mindset the way that you are? And I say it because I very much am a firm believer in positive mindset. I believe that it's important that we always try and look at a glass half full than a glass half empty. But I also believe that we also have to connect to how we're feeling and not push that away, because again, you're suppressing. But some people might find that very hard to connect to, because they might just go, well, I can't grasp the positive mindset because I'm just not there.
Yeah.
On those days when you can't, or you're struggling to get there, what do you do?
Well, I mean, I think I don't. So I'll give you 2 answers. I think if you sacrifice short-term happiness for a little bit of hardship and pain, you'll end up with long-term happiness and growth. If you change your identity and you morph into the person you want to become, getting out of bed to go to the gym just becomes part of who you are, no matter how you feel. Right. And that's why I emphasize the importance of if you want to change your habits and you want to create belief in yourself, you have to actually start to change who you are as a person. And so I think once you get to that place, I've gotten to this place where it's if I don't feel like getting out of bed, I still get out of bed because I'm not thinking about staying anymore. You know what I mean? Because it's not part of who I am. That said, thinking back on the days where it was hard, where I was still in the infant stages of transformation and I was still going through it, I would just think about, I had the ability to think about my cellmate in my ear, saying some really not so nice things if I was going to stay in bed. But then also I was you deserve it. You deserve to get out of bed and you deserve to better yourself. You deserve this. And also that, because a lot of times when we're, at least in my experience, when we're afraid of getting out of bed, or we're oh, I don't feel like doing it, it's because we haven't achieved certain things, or we're worried about what the day is going to bring, or we're worried about the next day. And I think that's where gratitude comes in. And I think gratitude can have a variety of happen in a variety of ways. Obviously there's journals and there's things you can say, but for me, gratitude is focusing on how far I've come and not how far I have to go. And I think when you adopt that mindset, it kind of in a way humbles you and it brings you back to the present moment of saying, okay, I'm not where I want to be today, but look at where I am. Because I think that's what, a lot of times people become stuck, when they're laying in bed and they're oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to get these things done? And so that's my I guess, roundabout way of saying that. I think long term, if you change yourself enough, I mean, at least in my experience, like, I mean, there's bad days for sure. I mean, there's a lot of days where I'm like, oh, I'm not feeling 100%. Like, I think most days
You're human, Doug.
I know,
You're
I'm like,
human.
yeah, like most days I'm not 100%, but I'm like, you know, I'm above like 75 to 80, I think, which is really good. And so it's just not really in my DNA anymore. Like, oh, I'm just gonna lay in bed. I can't afford to lay in bed. Like, if I just laid in bed and just canceled my podcast interviews, or I just stopped, you know, engaging with people, like, I would be broke, and I would be like even worse off than I was when I started.
And not just financially, you know, in your soul level, you would be, because you would be removing so much of the richness that comes with the hard work. I love when you said, I think that's such a lovely place to kind of like wrap up the show, because something that I have changed in myself in the last 2 years is, you talk about gratitude, and I think it's such an important one to speak about. But what I heard from what you're doing is the reflection. And it's the reflecting on like where you've come from to where you are now, that constant looking back, which is basically a measure of your growth. And that kind of naturally brings the gratitude, as opposed to kind of these, as you mentioned, these like big goals that sometimes can feel so defeating. Oh, that's how I felt. That actually, if I set these goals, but I also look back on how far maybe I have achieved in 3 months or 6 months or even 10 years, you feel that motivation to be able to get to that next stage.
Yeah, and I guess it's like negativity breeds negativity, and if you just focus on all the stuff you haven't achieved in your life, you know, that will like breed in itself, and then you'll end up like just harping on that and ruminating. And I mean, but it's also I mean, it's tough, and I have compassion for people. I don't want to sit here and say like it's not easy, but you have to like, you know, Jordan Peterson has this quote that I really like, and he says something like, if you're not where you want to be with yourself, if you're not where you want to be in life, like try telling yourself the truth. It's something like that, right? And I think people like,
and the truth can be hard to accept, right?
It can be really hard to accept, painful,
yeah,
very
I
painful.
think it's much easier to tell a lie to ourselves than tell the truth.
Totally.
And to walk into the face of suffering. I think you said a quote that you love, but one of the ones that I loved, and which I think sums up exactly what you're trying to say, like about having compassion. But you have to fail to grow stronger. You have to fail to run faster. And I heard you say that on a podcast, and it really stuck with me. I absolutely loved that quote about facing failure with excitement and not fear.
Yeah.
So I wonder what this last question is going to bring, which is a question I asked all my guests, Doug, which is, what does live well, be well mean to you?
So live well, be well to me means that I'm taking care of myself from a fitness perspective, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. I'm spending time with people that bring the best out in me. I'm focused on things that light me up. I'm being a good person in the world, being of service, and I am, you know, dreaming big, holding myself accountable, and just doing what I can to make a difference in the world.
Amazing. That's beautiful. Thank you, Doug. Thank you so much for coming on. I know that people, especially, you know, whether it's in America or across the seas in the UK, are going to want to know more about where they can find you, more about what you're doing. So if you can like share your platforms, that would be amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on and for your amazing questions. I really loved our conversation. If people want to find me, I'm at Doug Bopst on all platforms. And then YouTube, you just search Doug Bopst. You can find me there. DougBopst.com has more media I've done. You can also buy a copy of one of my books there as well. But yeah, I mean, thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks, Doug. And thanks for teaching so many of us how to live well, be well. I really appreciate you and your hyper inspiring story. I'm so pleased that a plethora of our mutual friends connected us. So thank you.
You're welcome.